Evelyn Hart had always believed that cities breathe at night. Boston especially. It inhaled with the rumble of distant trains, exhaled through the low hum of passing cars, and whispered through the narrow alleyways between aging brick buildings. From the window of her tiny studio apartment, barely larger than the walk-in closet she once had in her childhood mansion, Evelyn would often stand and listen to that breath. Comforted her. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, even if her life lately felt like a balancing act performed on a thin, fragile thread. That night was no different. The radiator clanked aggressively as if announcing its own exhaustion, while outside, the street lamp flickered like it was arguing with the darkness. Evelyn sat on the small futon she called her bed, textbooks scattered around her feet, and a half-empty cup of instant ramen growing cold beside her. She was reviewing notes for her strategic management midterm, her eyes heavy, her mind exhausted, and her stomach aching from hours without a proper meal. She had just finished a 9-hour shift at the Beacon Café, and her legs throbbed with each small movement. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya lit up the cracked screen. "You still alive?" Evelyn faintly smiled. Barely, she typed back. "Studying now." "You? Already in bed. You work too much, Ev." She didn't answer. She didn't know how to. What could she say? "I work too much because I chose to hide the fact that I'm wealthy beyond anyone's imagination? Because I wanted to see who I am without the Hart name guarding my every move? Because I wanted to understand the world from the ground instead of the penthouse?" No. She simply put the phone away and returned to her notes. The words blurred, weaving into one another until they lost all meaning. Strategic forecasting, market disruptions, competitive advantage. Concepts she once found exciting now tasted stale on her tongue, soured by the fatigue that seemed permanently lodged in her bones. But she pushed on. She always pushed on. After all, this was the life she had chosen. Yet choosing it didn't make it easier. At midnight, when the radiator hissed like a tired old man and the city's breath slowed into a sleepy rhythm, Evelyn finally closed her textbook. She lay back on her futon, exhaustion dragging her into sleep even as her worries clung to her like persistent shadows. Tomorrow she had Coleman's class, the one place where her determination always felt like it was being simultaneously tested and crushed. Her eyes drifted closed and, for once, she didn't dream of anything at all. Morning arrived without mercy. The alarm screamed at 6 a.m. and Evelyn bolted upright, her heart pounding. She turned it off with a frustrated sigh and sat at the edge of the futon, staring at the chipped paint on the wall across from her. She rubbed her eyes, willing herself to move. She had to be at the cafe by 7. The shower barely had warm water. The coffee machine sputtered like it was on its last breath. Her only clean shirt had a faint stain from last week's espresso spill. But she made do with all of it. She always did. The cafe smelled of roasted beans, cinnamon syrup, and the faint, comforting scent of pastries fresh out of the oven. Morning customers lined up quickly, most of them groggy professionals who barely made eye contact as they ordered. Evelyn worked with a practiced rhythm, her hands moving with the muscle memory of someone who had repeated the same motions thousands of times. Pour, steam, tap, swirl, serve, smile. Her manager, Laura, was kind in a worn-down sort of way. Blonde hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes, her voice always 2 notches above exhausted. "Morning, Ev. Didn't expect you after your long shift yesterday." "I'm okay," Evelyn said, tightening her apron. "Just a bit tired." "You say that every day." Evelyn shrugged. It was true, she was always tired, but she didn't mind the work. Not really. What she minded was how the world treated her because of where she chose to stand in it. As if holding a mop made her less intelligent. As if wearing an apron meant she had fewer dreams. At 8:50, she clocked out, changed into her worn jeans and sweater, and hurried across campus. The sunlight glinted off the modern glass buildings of Eastbridge University. Students walked by in expensive jackets, holding designer backpacks and Starbucks cups, talking about ski trips and internships their parents had arranged. She blended in just enough. Not wealthy, not poor, until she opened her mouth and someone caught the faint hint of exhaustion in her voice. That's when they realized she didn't belong to their world. She made it to Coleman's class with 2 minutes to spare. Rows of students filled the spacious lecture hall, the projector humming softly. Professor Richard Coleman stood at the front, straightening his tie while reviewing notes on his tablet. He was tall, salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose in a way that made him look more sophisticated than he deserved. His reputation preceded him. Brilliant, ruthless, impossibly elitist. Evelyn took her usual seat in the second-to-last row. Invisible, unobtrusive, or so she hoped. The lecture began with Coleman's voice booming across the hall. Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be discussing competitive advantage models in volatile markets. As he spoke, Evelyn copied notes quietly, focusing intensely to keep herself awake. But halfway through the lecture, Coleman paused mid-sentence, scanned the room, and his eyes landed on her like a hawk spotting prey. Miss Hart, he said, why don't you answer this for us? Evelyn blinked. What was the question, sir? Oh dear. Coleman sighed dramatically, earning a few chuckles from students in the front row. Perhaps you'd know if you weren't dozing off. Her cheeks flushed. I wasn't. Stand up. Her heart hammered, but she obeyed. Explain how a low-resource company can compete against a high-resource competitor in an emerging market. She inhaled, steadying herself. By leveraging agility and innovation, smaller companies can adapt faster to market changes. Coleman raised a hand to stop her. Incorrect. But, sit down. The room rippled with laughter. Evelyn lowered herself into her seat, eyes stinging. She had been right, of course she had been right. The answer was straight out of their required readings. But Coleman didn't care. He hadn't called on her for academic insight. He called on her to humiliate her. The lecture continued, but Evelyn heard none of it. Her ears rang, and her hands trembled slightly as she wrote. When class finally ended, she gathered her things quickly, wanting nothing more than to disappear into the hallway. But Coleman intercepted her. Miss Hart, he called, not unkindly, worse, condescendingly. A word. She forced a polite smile. Yes, sir? Your midterm paper. He handed her a stapled packet. The red ink on the front glared like a wound. D-. Her breath caught. Sir, I worked really hard on this. And it shows. It's just unfortunate that hard work cannot compensate for lack of insight. She swallowed. May I ask, what was wrong with it? Your perspective, he said simply, as if that were explanation enough. And your background. Students who must work part-time often struggle in competitive environments like this. It's understandable. There it was. The sting beneath his words. Not even subtle. Sir, my job has nothing to do with. Miss Hart. He leaned slightly closer. This is a program meant to produce industry leaders. You would do well to consider whether this path is truly suited for someone like you. Her vision blurred. She nodded once and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Students brushed past her, chatting, laughing, living in a world she no longer felt welcome in. Outside, the sky had darkened with approaching rain. The wind tugged at her sweater as she crossed the courtyard, but she barely felt it. The more she thought about Coleman's words, the deeper they burrowed. Someone like you, someone like you, someone like you. The phrase repeated like a taunt in her mind all the way to the café. Through another shift of smiling, serving, wiping, cleaning. When her shift ended late that night, rain poured in sheets across the pavement. She stepped outside into the storm, letting it soak her hair, her clothes, her skin. Anything to hide the tears she refused to shed. Her phone vibrated again. Jonathan. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? You sound tired, he said. His familiar warm voice wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Are you all right? Evelyn stood under the awning, watching the rain hammer the sidewalk. I'm fine. You're lying, he said gently. She closed her eyes. It's just, today was rough. Is it the same professor again? The one you mentioned last week? She exhaled shakily. Coleman. He humiliated me in class. And he said, her voice cracked. He said my background makes me unfit. There was silence on the other side of the line. Then Jonathan spoke, calm but firm. Evelyn, you are the heir to an empire. Your background is stronger than anyone else's at that school. But no one knows that, she whispered. I didn't want them to. Yes, he said, and I supported that. But you hiding your identity doesn't give anyone the right to mistreat you. Thunder rumbled overhead. Evelyn watched the water collect in rivers along the sidewalk. Coleman is threatening to block your honors thesis, Jonathan added. Her stomach dropped. What? It hasn't been finalized yet, but he has influence. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She shook her head in disbelief, water dripping from her mascara and mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. This is getting worse, Evelyn, Jonathan continued softly. And I don't think staying silent is protecting you anymore. The rain continued pouring, drenching her fully now. She didn't step back under the awning. She needed the cold. She needed the distraction from the anger rising inside her like steam from a boiling kettle. I'll handle it, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I know you will, Jonathan said. But remember, you don't have to handle it alone. She hung up, shivering, and began walking home. Her shoes soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but she kept moving. With each step, thoughts ricocheted in her mind. About her parents, about the Hart legacy she had run from, about the reason she had chosen an anonymous life in the first place. She wanted to prove something. She wanted to be someone of her own making. But maybe she had mistaken invisibility for independence. Maybe, just maybe, choosing to hide didn't mean she deserved to be overlooked. She reached her apartment, dripping and exhausted. She peeled off her wet clothes, changed into warm pajamas, and sat cross-legged on the futon, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp outside her window. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something ignite inside her chest. Not anger, not revenge, but a quiet, simmering resolve. She lay down, clutching her pillow, the room dim and still. She didn't know how she would confront Coleman. She didn't know how she would reclaim her voice. But she knew something had to change. Morning would come again, and with it, a chance to begin rewriting her story. As she closed her eyes, the storm outside slowly softened, and while sleep began to wash over her like a gentle tide, a thought lingered in her mind, one that carried her into the next day and into the next chapter of her life. No more hiding, and with that realization quietly settling into her bones, the path toward confrontation, and ultimately transformation, began to unfold, leading her toward Chapter 2, where the true depth of Professor Coleman's cruelty would reveal itself, and where Evelyn would face the doubts that threatened to break her before she ever learned to rise. Sleep never came easily to Evelyn after nights like that. Even when the storm outside faded into nothing more than the faint drip of water sliding from gutters, her mind refused to quiet. It replayed every moment. Coleman's cold voice, the mocking laughter of her classmates, the weight of that red-inked D- like a bruise pressed directly against her ribs. When her alarm blared at dawn, she wasn't sure whether she'd slept 10 minutes or 10 hours. All she knew was that the heaviness in her chest had settled deeper, as if slowly taking root. The early morning light filtering through her blinds looked tired, pale, unwilling to shine. As she dressed, pulling on jeans stiff from too many washes, tugging a sweater over her head that still smelled faintly of stale coffee, she told herself over and over, today will be better. It has to be. But the moment she stepped outside, the cold kissed her cheeks with sharp indifference, and she realized the universe didn't owe her anything. She tucked her chin into her scarf and headed toward the bus stop. Campus was quieter than usual when she arrived. The world looked damp, freshly washed by last night's storm. Students trudged along the sidewalks with headphones in, faces half hidden under hoodies. Evelyn walked quickly, head down, as though shrinking herself might protect her from hurtful eyes and careless gossip. She doubted anyone in Coleman's class still thought about what had happened yesterday. But shame had a way of stretching time. For her, the wound was still open and raw. Her first class passed in a haze. She took notes mechanically, but her thoughts drifted. She checked the time every few minutes, dread building like a slow drumbeat in her stomach. Coleman's class was at 11. By 10:45, her hands were shaking. She lingered outside the lecture hall, her back pressed to the cold wall. Students filed past her, chatting about internships and weekend plans. A few glanced her way, but none stopped. She didn't expect them to. When she finally stepped inside the lecture hall, she moved like someone entering hostile territory. Coleman stood by the projector, prepping his slides with a slight smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. He always looked as though he knew something everyone else didn't. Some private joke he never planned to share. Evelyn chose her seat in the second-to-last row again, sinking into it as though hoping it might swallow her whole. The lecture began as usual. Coleman pacing, gesturing, dissecting case studies, his voice too crisp, too assured. But there was something new in his tone today. A sharpness, a certain anticipation. At first she ignored it, assuming it was her own anxiety coloring his every word. But halfway through class, when he clicked to the next slide, she froze. Displayed on the screen was an essay prompt. Her essay prompt. "Let's take a moment," Coleman announced, clasping his hands behind his back, "to discuss a recent submission that fell short of expectations." The air left her lungs. Her throat tightened. No, he wouldn't. But he did. He lifted a packet of papers, her paper, and held it like damning evidence. "This," he said, waving it gently, "is an example of how failing to understand one's limitations leads to intellectual overreach." There was a ripple of laughter. Evelyn felt her pulse spike. She stared at her desk, nails digging into her palms. Heat crawled up her neck, burning under her skin like a fever. Coleman continued, pacing slowly. "Now, I won't name the student who submitted this out of respect," he paused to smirk. "But I trust some of you may deduce it." A whisper behind her, a quiet snicker from the front row, the unmistakable thrum of humiliation rising through her bones. Her breathing grew uneven. Every word felt like it was aimed directly at her, arrow after arrow sinking deeper. She couldn't move, couldn't look at him, couldn't believe this was happening again. "Of course," he added. "Some students simply lack the exposure or background necessary to grasp strategic theory, and that's not their fault, but it does limit their potential." He wasn't speaking to a classroom anymore. He was speaking to her, only her, and everyone knew it. The moment the lecture ended, Evelyn bolted for the exit. But Coleman's voice cut through the air before she could slip away. "Miss Hart, stay a moment." Her legs stiffened. She turned, face blank, hiding the storm inside her. Coleman approached with his arms folded, the very image of academic superiority. "You seem upset." She said nothing. He continued, "This is a rigorous program, Miss Hart. We hold our students to the highest standards." Her jaw clenched. "I understand that. Do you?" His voice softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was condescension dressed in silk. "Your performance suggests otherwise." Evelyn finally met his gaze, anger flickering beneath her restraint. "Sir, I submitted a strong paper. I know I did. You're misjudging me." "Misjudging?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "My dear, this isn't personal. You simply lack the upbringing to understand higher-level strategy." Her breath caught. "Upbringing?" He leaned closer. "Students with limited means often overestimate their abilities. It's natural." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know anything about my background." "No," he said, smiling thinly. "But I can guess." And with that, he walked away. Evelyn stood frozen, fingers trembling. It wasn't just contempt anymore. It was cruelty, deliberate and targeted. And now, her humiliation wasn't limited to a classroom. It was becoming a pattern. A message. "You don't belong here." The words echoed in her mind long after Coleman left the room. She packed her things slowly, feeling the weight of eyes on her, even imagined ones. As she stepped into the hallway, she pulled her phone out with shaking hands. She typed a message to Maya, then erased it. She tried Jonathan, then stopped. She didn't know what to say, didn't know where to begin. Outside, the clouds were gathering again, as though the sky was mimicking the heaviness in her chest. She walked quickly across campus, head down, her mind a chaotic mix of anger, shame, confusion, and something sharper, something dangerously close to breaking. She didn't remember how she got to the café. One moment she was on campus. The next, she was behind the counter tying her apron. Laura gave her a concerned look. Rough day? Evelyn forced a weak smile. Something like that. Well, if you need to talk. I'm fine. Laura's expression said she didn't believe her, but she didn't push. The rest of the shift blurred into a haze of orders and polite smiles. A businessman demanded a refund because his coffee was too hot. A student argued about the Wi-Fi speed. A mother apologized as her toddler knocked over a cup. Through it all, Evelyn worked silently, her thoughts drifting again and again to Coleman's voice. Students like you, limited means, natural limitations, know your place. By the time she clocked out, her feet ached, her back throbbed, and her throat felt tight from holding back tears she refused to shed. Outside, the rain had started again. Not a storm, just a gentle drizzle, light enough to be ignored, heavy enough to seep into her bones. She walked slowly, letting the raindrops hit her face, her sweater, her hair. The city lights blurred through the wet shimmer on the pavement. Exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight, making each step feel harder than the last. Her phone buzzed. Jonathan. She hesitated but answered. I've been thinking, he said, skipping any greeting. I spoke with the board today. She blinked. About what? About the Future Path Scholarship Fund, he said. Their annual donation to Eastbridge is being increased. She frowned. Okay. Why are you telling me this now? Because, Jonathan said, voice gentle. They're requesting a representative to speak at the graduation ceremony. Evelyn stopped walking. Rain dripped from her bangs into her eyes. Jonathan, hear me out, he urged. You've hidden your identity for years. But maybe it's time to stop letting others write your story. Her heart raced. I can't. They'll think I lied. You didn't lie, he said firmly. You simply didn't disclose what wasn't necessary, and you allowed yourself to grow. That's not deceit. That's self-discovery. She closed her eyes, rain running down her cheeks like cold tears. Jonathan, if people find out who I am, they'll finally see you, he said softly. Not the girl Coleman calls limited. Not the student he tries to belittle. They'll see Evelyn Hart, the real one. She opened her eyes again, staring at the shimmering lights of passing cars. She felt something shift inside her. Fear, yes, but also a strange spark of defiance. I don't know, she whispered. You don't have to decide now, he replied. Just think about it. I will. When she hung up, the city's breath surrounded her again. Car horns in the distance. A siren somewhere blocks away. Footsteps echoing off wet pavement. She stood there for a long moment, letting the world move around her. Maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe hiding had protected her once, but now it was suffocating her. Maybe reclaiming her name wasn't giving in to privilege. It was reclaiming her worth. She walked the rest of the way home with steadier steps. By the time she reached her apartment, her resolve felt different. Less fragile, more alive. Inside, she peeled off her damp clothes, wrapped herself in a blanket, and pulled out her laptop. She opened her email, hesitated, then began typing a message to the dean, requesting a meeting about her academic standing. Her fingers hovered over the send button. Her heart pounded. Then she hit send. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and breathed deeply. The air smelled of rain and old plaster. The city outside seemed to hum with possibility instead of defeat. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, a shift occurred within her. Not loud, not dramatic, but powerful. She was done being invisible. She didn't know exactly how she would confront Coleman. She didn't know what the next days would bring. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to let him break her. And as morning crept in again, quiet and gray, it brought with it the first stirrings of a reckoning. One that would push her to the edge, force her to confront everything she had avoided, and ultimately set her on the path toward the moment when the world would finally learn her name. The path that would lead directly into Chapter 3, where the confrontation between Evelyn and Professor Coleman would deepen, where stakes would rise, and where the pressure threatening to crush her would instead trigger the beginnings of her transformation. Evelyn woke to the soft hum of early morning traffic and the faint chill of her apartment whispering across her skin. For a moment, just a brief, fragile second, the world felt still, as though nothing had gone wrong, as though Professor Coleman's voice hadn't carved itself into her bones, as though she were just another student in just another city waking up to just another day. But memory didn't allow illusions for long. It returned slowly, then all at once. The public humiliation, the D-, the insinuation that her worth was tied to her wallet rather than her mind. She exhaled steadily, letting the weight settle before she rose from the futon, feet meeting the cold floor. She had an early meeting with the dean. That alone sent a tremor of fear down her spine. Not because she'd done something wrong, but because stepping forward felt like stepping out of the shadows she had carefully chosen. She brushed her teeth, pulled her hair into a low ponytail, and put on her least worn sweater, navy blue, soft enough to grant her a sliver of comfort. Outside, the morning fog clung to the edges of buildings, softening their outlines. Students hurried across campus, clutching coffee cups, wiping sleep from their eyes. Evelyn moved with quiet purpose, weaving through the crowd like a ghost only she could see. The administrative building rose ahead, its tall glass doors reflecting the gray sky. She paused before entering, staring at her blurred reflection. She barely recognized the girl staring back. Tired eyes, drawn face, determination flickering beneath exhaustion. She pushed the door open. Inside, the halls smelled faintly of polished floors and printer ink. The receptionist at the front desk greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning. Appointment?" "Yes," Evelyn replied. "With Dean Marlborough. 11 o'clock. The receptionist glanced at her computer. "Right, you can go ahead. He's ready for you." Evelyn's pulse kicked up a little. She walked toward the office at the end of the corridor, her steps muffled by the thick carpet. When she reached the door, she hesitated only a second before knocking. "Come in," a warm voice answered. Dean Marlborough sat behind a large wooden desk, reading glasses perched low on his nose. His office was decorated with framed accolades, bookshelves filled with thick academic volumes, and a window overlooking the quad where students crossed paths like threads in a tapestry. "Miss Hart," he said kindly, "thank you for coming. Please take a seat." She sat across from him, hands clasped in her lap. "I received your email," he began. "You mentioned concerns about your academic evaluation?" Her throat tightened. "Yes, sir." He leaned back, nodding for her to continue. It's about Professor Coleman." She felt her fingers tremble and folded them tightly to hide it. "I believe he's misgraded my work, and I feel that he treats me differently from other students." The dean raised an eyebrow, not in disbelief, but in interest. "Differently how?" Evelyn inhaled slowly. "He singles me out in class. I know professors question students, but his tone, his remarks, they're often about my background, or what he assumes about it." Marlborough removed his glasses. "Assumes? He thinks I'm limited because I work part-time." Saying it aloud made her chest tighten again. "He's made comments implying I don't belong in the program, that students like me lack potential." The dean frowned. He steepled his fingers thoughtfully. "This is a serious accusation. I wouldn't make it if it weren't true," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And the essay grade?" She opened her bag and handed him her paper, placing it gently on his desk. "I worked hard on this. I know it deserves better than a D-, and I think he knows that too." He skimmed through the pages, his brows knitted together. "This is quite solid work," he murmured. "Certainly not D- quality." Her heart leaped and fell at the same time. He closed the packet. "Miss Hart, I need you to understand that confronting a faculty member, especially one with tenure and a strong influence on the board, is not easy. And it's not something I take lightly, but mistreatment, bias, those are issues I will not ignore. Evelyn nodded, feeling a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: validation. I'll review this thoroughly, he continued. I'll also speak to Professor Coleman. Discreetly, fear shot through her. If he finds out I went to you, this will not come back to you, he assured. I promise. She swallowed, the tension in her shoulders loosening a little. You did the right thing coming to me, he added gently. When she left the office, she stepped into the hallway feeling 10% lighter and 90% terrified. She knew this wasn't over. She knew confronting someone like Coleman, someone who thrived on power, would have consequences, even if indirect. But she had taken a step, a real step. Back on campus, a light drizzle fell, speckling her sweater. She walked slowly, letting the quiet soak into her. Students passed her, laughing, shoving, living in their own worlds. She wondered how many of them carried invisible weights like hers. How many were drowning beneath expectations or judgment. Her next class was quiet, uneventful. She barely absorbed the lecture. Her mind drifted again and again to what Marlborough would find, what Coleman would say, what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she'd made the right choice, but she knew silence was no longer an option. When her shift at the café began, Laura greeted her with a raised eyebrow. You look like you wrestled a bear. Just a long day, Evelyn muttered. Want a break before you start? No. If I sit down, I'll melt into the floor. Laura grinned. Fair enough. She began wiping tables, letting the motion ground her. The café buzzed with mid-afternoon energy. Students typing furiously on laptops, business people conducting hushed calls, a group of teenagers laughing over shared pastries. Evelyn immersed herself in work. It was the only space where she knew exactly what to do, where the steps were simple, where no professor dissected her worth based on assumptions. But fate or coincidence or cruel timing, whichever governed her life, had different plans for that afternoon. At precisely 4:12 p.m., the café door swung open, and in walked Professor Coleman. Her breath stopped. Her blood ran cold. She almost dropped the empty coffee cup in her hands. He didn't see her at first. He was too busy adjusting his coat, scanning the menu, approaching the counter with the entitled ease of someone who expected the world to make room for him. Laura smiled professionally. Good afternoon. What can I get you? Americano. Large. Extra hot. Evelyn ducked behind a display shelf, hoping he wouldn't notice her. But fate rarely granted her such mercy. As she stepped toward the espresso machine, he turned, and their eyes locked. His gaze sharpened with recognition, then something darker. A smirk ghosted across his face. Well, he said slowly. Miss Hart. Her voice failed her. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep it steady. Hello, Professor. He leaned casually against the counter. I must admit, I'm surprised. I didn't know you worked here. He absolutely knew. He had hinted at it more than once. She felt heat creep into her cheeks. I do, she said simply. Long hours, I assume. Yes. And you think you can balance this? He gestured vaguely around the cafe. With the demands of my course? She inhaled sharply, willing herself not to break. I manage. Do you? His smile thinned. Your paper suggests otherwise. Before she could respond, Laura approached with his drink. Large Americano, extra hot. That'll be $6.65. He paid without breaking eye contact. Thank you, he said to Laura, before lowering his voice again. Miss Hart, do remember, hard work is admirable, but knowing your limits is wiser. With that, he walked away, coffee in hand, the bells above the cafe door jingling as he left. Evelyn stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. Laura approached cautiously. You okay? She nodded, though the trembling in her hands betrayed her. But the day wasn't finished with her yet. By evening, as she clocked out and walked home, the city felt strangely louder. Cars honked aggressively. Construction echoed down the block. People brushed past her with brisk, impatient steps. She felt small, insignificant, like a grain of sand in a storm. Her phone buzzed. Jonathan again. Evelyn? How did it go today? She considered lying, but her voice wavered. I talked to the dean. Well done. And then, I saw Coleman. At the café. A pause. A dangerous pause. What did he say? Enough. Jonathan exhaled sharply. Evelyn, you don't deserve this. No one does, she whispered. She reached her building, exhaustion weighing her limbs. Inside, her apartment felt emptier than usual, as though her emotions had hollowed it out. She set her bag down, wrapped herself in her blanket, and curled up on the futon. For a long moment, she stared at the ceiling, tears collecting but never falling. She was too tired to cry, too tired to yell, too tired to unravel. She just lay there, listening to the faint hum of the city breathing beyond her window. Hours passed before she moved again. She sat up, reached for her notebook, and began writing thoughts, fears, hopes, anything she could untangle enough to see clearly. Words spilled out in uneven lines. I am not what he says I am. I am not limited. I belong here. I will not shrink anymore. When she finally stopped, her hand cramped, but her chest felt lighter. She closed the notebook, placed it beside her pillow, and turned off the light. Outside, the fog had thickened again, wrapping the world in a strange, muted silence. But inside her heart, something stirred, something fragile yet unyielding, like a spark that refused to die. She fell asleep knowing tomorrow would test her again, knowing Coleman would not go quietly, knowing her decision to fight back would ripple further than she expected. And she didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning. Ahead lay a tightening storm, one that would force her to confront truths she'd buried, choices she'd avoided, and a future she had never imagined facing alone. A future waiting in Chapter 4, where the consequences of her complaint would begin unfolding, where alliances would form in unexpected places, and where the line between fear and courage would blur as Evelyn stepped closer toward reclaiming her identity. The sun rose slowly the next morning, casting a pale wash of light across Evelyn's apartment. It wasn't warm light, not the kind that promised good things, but the kind that simply insisted on showing up regardless of whether anyone wanted it to. She blinked awake, disoriented, her blanket tangled around her legs. For several seconds she lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember who she was supposed to be today. The student fighting for fairness, the cafe worker hiding her shaking hands, or the heiress pretending she wasn't one. When she finally forced herself upright, her muscles ached from tension more than fatigue. She shuffled into the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and studied her reflection. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, the kind carved by worry and sleepless nights. She dabbed concealer under them, tied her hair back, and slipped into the same worn jeans and sweater she had worn the day before. Today, she told herself while securing her backpack, would be different. Today, something had shifted. Dean Marlborough's expression when he read her paper, the surprise, the genuine concern, gave her the tiniest spark of hope. Not much, not steady, but something. She held on to that ember as she left her apartment. Campus was cloaked in a chilly morning haze. Students hurried past her, their footsteps tapping against wet pavement. The quad was still empty enough that the sound echoed. Evelyn walked briskly, her breath visible in the air, trying to shove aside the dread lingering like a thick, unspoken cloud behind her. Her first class passed in a blur. She caught only fragments of the lecture, words like forecasting models and sustainability index, floating like stray pieces of conversation overheard in a dream. She scribbled notes anyway, unsure if she'd ever use them but knowing that the distraction kept her sane. Halfway through the morning, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it under the desk. Jonathan, call me when you're free. Her stomach tightened. She hoped it wasn't bad news. After class, she stepped outside and found a quiet spot near the side of the business building, where a row of leafless trees stretched their brittle branches into the gray sky. She dialed Jonathan. He picked up on the first ring. Evelyn? I'm here. What's going on? I spoke with the board. he said, voice layered with something complex, something between caution and anticipation. About the scholarship fund. They're pushing forward. And now the university is formally discussing the donor representative for graduation. Evelyn leaned against the cold wall, the wind tugging at loose strands of her hair. Jonathan, I told you, I haven't decided anything yet. Yes, but you need to know something. He hesitated. Coleman sits on one of the internal committees reviewing student eligibility for honors. If he's already targeting you, there's a real risk he may try to escalate things. Her pulse quickened. Escalate how? You mentioned he hinted at blocking your thesis. Now that the board is increasing its involvement with the school, if he feels threatened, Jonathan's voice softened. People like him don't respond well to anything that undermines their authority. A wave of unease washed over her. She turned away from the foot traffic, lowering her voice. But he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know who I really am. No, Jonathan agreed gently. But bullies don't need to know the truth to feel threatened. Power, real or imagined, is enough to make them lash out. Her breath fogged in front of her. She wrapped an arm around herself, as though trying to contain the sudden tremble in her chest. What do I do? She asked quietly. For now, Jonathan replied. Stay steady. Keep notes. Document everything. And let the dean handle his part. But what if? Evelyn, he said, firm but comforting. You are stronger than he thinks, stronger than you think. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. She closed her eyes, letting those words seep into her, anchor her. Okay. And remember, he added lightly, no matter how today goes, I'm on your side. I know, she said softly. Thank you. She hung up just as the bell tower chimed from across campus. Students streamed toward the cafeteria, laughter and chatter filling the air. For a moment, she envied them. Their ease, their certainty, their unshaken belief that the world was manageable, fair, predictable. She headed to her next class, but her nerves hummed restlessly, refusing to settle. By noon, she could barely keep still. The memory of Coleman sneering at her in the café, the way he had looked at her like she was a nuisance, not a student. It all simmered beneath her skin. During a short break, she checked her email and froze when she saw a new message. From Dean Marlborough, subject, follow-up. Her hands tightened around her phone as she opened it. Miss Hart, I've reviewed your submission further and discussed some preliminary concerns with relevant faculty. Please stop by my office at your earliest convenience. DM. Her mouth went dry. This wasn't bad necessarily, but it wasn't casual either. She went immediately. This time, the receptionist didn't ask her name, just nodded toward the office door, as though expecting her. Evelyn stepped inside. The dean looked up from his desk, adjusting his glasses. Miss Hart, thank you for coming so quickly. Please sit. Her heartbeat thumped loudly in her ears as she lowered herself into the chair. I spent the morning reviewing your paper more thoroughly, he began. And I also looked into past submissions you've made for Coleman's course. She tensed. And? He tapped the stack of papers on his desk. Your work is consistently strong, occasionally excellent. If what I'm seeing here truly reflects your abilities, which I believe it does, then the grade you were given is not only questionable but academically unjustifiable. Air rushed from her lungs. I also reviewed participation records, he continued. It seems you've been called upon significantly more often than your peers. And, based on student testimony I've gathered quietly, the tone of these interactions appears to be consistently negative. Her mouth opened slightly. Students said that? Anonymous testimonies, he clarified. But credible. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, relief blending with disbelief. So what happens now? I intend to launch a formal review, he said. Not a confrontation. A review. He leaned forward. This protects you, and it ensures any findings are handled impartially. Her fingers gripped the edges of her sweater. And Coleman? His expression darkened slightly. He will cooperate, whether he wishes to or not. She swallowed. The idea of Coleman finding out, even indirectly, terrified her. Yet some small ember inside her glowed brighter than before. "You're not alone in this," Marlborough said quietly. "And you don't deserve mistreatment. Not in my institution." Those simple words, spoken without pity, without condescension, felt like a lifeline thrown across a vast, cold sea. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. When she left the office, she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope twisting through her. She made her way through the courtyard, her steps quicker now, her thoughts swirling. She still had work later. She still had to face her classes. She still had to survive the unpredictability of whatever Coleman might do next. But she wasn't powerless anymore. The afternoon passed with a steady hum of nervous energy. She felt eyes lingering on her, students glancing, wondering if rumors were swirling, or if her pale, tense expression simply drew attention. Even the professor in her 2 o'clock class paused once, looking at her with concern before continuing the lecture. When her shift at the café started, Laura greeted her with warm sympathy. "You look tired again. Everything all right?" "Just a lot happening," Evelyn said. Laura didn't pry, but she placed a free muffin on the counter later, murmuring, "In case you forget to eat again." Evelyn ate it gratefully during a quiet moment. But the calm didn't last long. At 6:17 p.m., the cafe door opened sharply, and 2 students from her program walked in, whispering to each other. They took a table near the window, and while she wiped the espresso machine, she caught fragments of their conversation. "Did you hear about the review committee? Something about complaints? Think it's about Coleman? Someone said a student filed against him." Her heart pounded. They didn't look at her, didn't even notice her presence. She waited for them to say more, but their conversation drifted toward weekend plans. Still, her stomach churned. She hadn't meant for word to spread. She hadn't wanted anyone to know. When her shift ended, she walked out into the night air, cool and crisp. For once, it wasn't raining. The city lights reflected against the pavement like scattered stars. She pulled her jacket tighter and headed home, her thoughts unraveling with each step. By the time she reached her apartment, exhaustion settled into her bones like a quiet, unwelcome companion. She changed into pajamas, curled up on her futon, and stared at the dim ceiling light as its soft glow flickered in the tiny room. She wondered what her parents would say if they were alive. Would they be proud of her for standing up for herself? Or would they chastise her for hiding who she was in the first place? Would they understand the need to be ordinary before allowing herself to be extraordinary? Her eyes drifted shut. She dreamed of hallways stretching endlessly, of voices whispering her name, of papers covered in red ink bleeding into shadows. She dreamed of sitting in a classroom where every student turned to look at her with blank, unreadable faces. She dreamed that Coleman stood at the front, smiling as if he knew how the story ended. When she woke, her heart was racing. Morning sunlight filtered gently through her blinds, warmer than the day before. For a moment, she lay still, letting her breath steady. She felt heavier than when she had gone to sleep, but also more anchored, more aware. She rose slowly, warmed leftover coffee in the microwave, and took small sips as she gazed out the window. Cars lined the street in an uneven pattern. A jogger passed by. A dog barked distantly. The world moved on, indifferent and unstoppable. And so would she. Campus felt different that day. Not dramatically. No whispers following her. No stares burning into her. But subtly. As if the ground beneath her had shifted just a few millimeters. Enough to be felt, but not seen. When she entered her 10 a.m. class, Maya waved her over. "Hey," Maya said. Concern etched into her expression. "Everything okay? You disappeared last night." "I just needed space," Evelyn replied gently. Maya hesitated. "People are talking. About Coleman. About some kind of committee looking into something?" Evelyn froze. "Do you know anything about that?" Maya asked softly. Evelyn forced a calm breath. "I talked to the dean. About my grade." Maya's eyes widened. "Ev, I didn't want to," Evelyn confessed. "But I had to." He crossed a line. Maya nodded slowly, squeezing her hand. Good. I'm glad you did. For the first time in what felt like days, Evelyn smiled. A small one, but real. The rest of the class passed gently. She felt Maya's silent support beside her, felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. In the hallways, she didn't shrink. She kept her head up. But as she walked between buildings later, she sensed movement behind her. Quick, purposeful footsteps. She turned. Coleman stood a few paces away. Her body went cold. Miss Hart, he said, voice low, calm. Too calm. A moment. Her pulse hammered. She glanced around, students walked by, oblivious. What is it, Professor? I hear there's been activity. He stepped closer. Conversations I was not informed of. Her chest tightened. He lowered his voice further. If you have concerns about your grade, the professional action would be to speak with me, directly. I did, she said. You dismissed me. His jaw twitched. He took a slow breath. Be careful, Miss Hart. Accusations have consequences. She felt anger flare beneath her fear. So does mistreating students. For a brief moment, so brief she might have imagined it, his mask slipped. Contempt flashed in his eyes. Then he straightened, expression cold and unreadable. This isn't over, he said, before turning and walking away. She stood rooted to the spot long after he disappeared. Her hands trembled. Her breaths came shallow. She knew then that everything was about to escalate. She could feel it in the air, thick, electric, heavy with unspoken threats. And yet, somewhere deep within her, something hardened, something unbreakable, because she had faced him, and she hadn't backed down. That night, she wrote in her notebook again, words flowing with new clarity. I am done being afraid. If the truth pushes him, let it. If the truth exposes him, so be it. I am not the one who should be ashamed. She closed the notebook with steady hands. Outside, the city lights shimmered through her window like distant beacons. Small, scattered, but refusing to burn out. Tomorrow would come again. And with it, the next chapter of the war unfolding between her and the professor who had underestimated her for too long. A chapter waiting in Chapter 5, where Coleman's retaliation would begin taking shape, where Evelyn would face the deepest test of her resilience yet, and where the first cracks in the facade surrounding her hidden identity would finally start to show. The next morning arrived too suddenly, as if the night had been cut short. Evelyn woke to the vibration of her phone on the nightstand, the insistent buzz dragging her from a dream she couldn't fully remember. Something about footsteps chasing her down an endless hallway. She blinked at the glowing screen, momentarily disoriented. It wasn't Jonathan. It wasn't Maya. It wasn't even the dean. It was an email notification from the university system. Her stomach tightened. She sat up slowly, blanket sliding off her shoulders. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped the notification open. There were 2 messages. One automated, one not. The automated message announced updated deadlines. Nothing alarming. The second email, however, bore a subject line that sent a cold ripple through her chest. Subject: Academic Standing Review, Immediate Attention Required. She opened it with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Miss Hart, your academic records are undergoing review due to concerns regarding performance, participation, and adherence to program standards. You are required to meet with the Academic Integrity Advisory Committee by the end of this week. Failure to respond will impact your eligibility to complete the semester. Office of Academic Standards. Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief. The words blurred. Her mouth went dry. Academic integrity. Performance. Eligibility. The phrasing was carefully vague, yet dangerous. This wasn't a simple inquiry. This was an attempt to cast suspicion on her entire academic standing. A stain appearing out of nowhere, threatening to spread. Her pulse quickened. She read it again, then again. Her lungs felt tight, like they couldn't fully expand. This wasn't coincidence. Coleman had moved faster than she expected. She closed the laptop carefully, as though afraid it might detonate, and pressed her palms into her eyes. Her mind spun with possibilities. Was this retaliation? A bluff? A threat to scare her into silence? So it was working. She dressed quickly, the fabric of her sweater clinging to her clammy skin, and left her apartment without breakfast. The cold morning air slapped her cheeks as she stepped outside. Campus felt different today. Louder, sharper. The winter wind carried snippets of conversations across the quad. Her senses sharpened until everything felt too close. Laughter behind her, footsteps to her left, someone calling across the courtyard. Every sound felt like it could be about her, even when she knew it wasn't. She walked faster. Her first class had barely begun when she slipped into a seat beside Maya. Her friend glanced at her, concern immediately clouding her features. "You look pale. What happened?" Evelyn swallowed. "I got an email. About a review." Maya's eyebrows drew together. "A review of what?" "My academic standing." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "Something about concerns." "What? That makes no sense." "I know." Maya hesitated. "Do you think Coleman?" "Yes." The word hung between them like a storm cloud. The professor began the lecture, but Evelyn barely heard a word. Each minute stretched painfully. Her foot tapped anxiously under the desk. When class finally ended, she hurried out, ignoring the growing pressure inside her chest. She needed answers. She needed someone who wasn't trying to destroy her. She headed straight toward the administrative building, feeling like every step echoed louder than it should. The receptionist looked up as Evelyn approached. "I need to see the dean," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's urgent." The receptionist nodded sympathetically. "He's in a meeting at the moment, but I'll let him know you're waiting." Evelyn sat in the hallway, her knee bouncing rapidly. Students and faculty walked past, none of them aware of the whirlwind inside her. She watched shadows move across the opposite wall as the sun passed behind clouds, dimming and brightening the hall, as though unsure whether to offer comfort or deepen the gloom. Finally, the door opened. Dean Marlborough stepped out, speaking softly to two professors. When he spotted Evelyn, concern flickered across his face. "Miss Hart," he said, walking toward her. "Come in." She followed him inside, and he closed the door gently before motioning for her to sit. "You received a notice," he guessed, settling into his chair. She nodded. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why would they review me? My grades have always been strong, except in one class." He sighed, removing his glasses. "I'm aware of the notice. It wasn't issued by my office." She blinked. "Then who?" "Professor Coleman," he said plainly. "He filed a report suggesting irregularities in your performance and questioning the legitimacy of your recent concerns." A chill ran through her. "He claims," the dean continued, "that your complaint is an attempt to deflect responsibility for poor academic performance." "That's not true," Evelyn protested immediately. I did everything right. I've done nothing wrong." "I know," the dean said gently, "which is why I'm going to advocate for you." Her breath hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, leaning forward, "that I'll attend the advisory meeting with you. It means I'll challenge the validity of the report. It means I'll ensure this does not become what he wants it to be." She nodded slowly, tears prickling behind her eyes. "But you must be prepared," he warned. "Coleman holds influence. He will not make this easy, and the committee will take his report seriously because of his tenure." She closed her eyes for a brief, shaky moment. "I understand." When the meeting ended, she stepped back into the hallway feeling both supported and exposed. Things were shifting too fast. She felt caught in a storm whose winds she had underestimated. By the time she reached the quad, Maya found her again. "What did he say?" Maya demanded. Evelyn told her everything, even the parts that made her voice shake. Maya's eyes flashed with anger. "Ev, he's trying to sabotage your entire academic career. That's insane. I don't know what to do." "You fight," Maya said fiercely. "You don't let him win." But Evelyn wasn't sure she had the strength to fight a man like Coleman. Even with the dean's support, she felt small, so small, like a single thread trying to pull against a net. Her shift at the café started at 4. She debated calling in sick, but part of her needed the distraction, needed normalcy, needed a place where she wasn't a pawn in someone else's power game. Laura greeted her warmly. "Long day? You have no idea," Evelyn murmured. The cafe was busy. She moved like she always did. Efficient, polite, blending into the rhythm of orders and chatter. But no matter how many drinks she prepared, no matter how many tables she wiped, her mind kept spiraling back to the email, the meeting, Coleman's threat. At 5:42 p.m., the door opened. Evelyn didn't have to look up to know who it was. She felt it. An icy shift in the air, the weight of someone's gaze. "Coleman." She stiffened. Laura approached him with automatic friendliness. "Hi there. What can I get for you?" "Americano," he said, eyes flicking toward Evelyn. She kept her focus on the espresso machine, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But he had no intention of remaining silent. He stepped closer to the counter, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I trust you received the committee's notice." Her fingers trembled around the portafilter. "Yes." "Good," he said softly. "Perhaps now you understand the consequences of overreaching." She turned, meeting his gaze. "This isn't right. You know it isn't." He smiled thinly. "Right and wrong are subjective, Miss Hart. But performance? Standards? Those are measurable. You're trying to intimidate me." "You're intimidated," he corrected. The Americano finished brewing. She placed the cup on the counter with a controlled, careful motion. $6.65, she said tightly. He paid in cash, lingering just a moment too long. "I look forward to our next discussion," he murmured before walking away. When the door closed behind him, her knees almost buckled. Laura reached out, steadying her. "That guy creeps me out," Laura muttered. "Are you okay?" Evelyn nodded weakly, though the room felt like it was spinning. She finished her shift in near silence. The second she left the cafe, she called Jonathan. He picked up immediately. "What happened?" he asked, hearing the panic in her breath. "Coleman, the committee, everything." She told him everything in a rapid, shaky stream. Jonathan sighed. "He's escalating faster than I anticipated." "What do I do?" she whispered. "You stay calm," he said firmly. "The board has already finalized the increased scholarship donation, and they want you to represent them." She froze, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Evelyn," he continued, "you are about to become the face of one of the largest philanthropic contributions the university has ever received, and Coleman has no idea who he's challenging. You have more power than you think." "But I'm not using that power," she whispered. "I'm pretending it doesn't exist." "Pretending doesn't change the truth," Jonathan said gently. "You are a heart, whether you hide it or not." She exhaled shakily, the words sinking deep into her. "Let the dean handle the academics," he continued. "You focus on surviving this week and making your choice about the scholarship event." She hung up feeling both buoyed and terrified. She walked home, each step slow, deliberate. The sky was deep navy, the streetlights casting yellow halos on the wet pavement. The city hummed around her, indifferent to her turmoil. Inside her apartment, she curled up on the futon, exhaustion heavy in her limbs. She pulled out her notebook, staring at the blank page for a long moment before writing. "He's pushing me into a corner. But maybe I'm meant to find a way out." Her hand shook, but she didn't stop writing. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of hiding. Something has to change." She closed the notebook and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The quiet stretched on, gentle yet suffocating. She felt the city outside her window breathe, and she really wondered, for the first time, what would happen if she stopped hiding? What would happen if she stood in the light? What would happen if the world knew who she truly was? The question lingered as she drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that the next day would push her closer to the edge than she'd ever been pushed before. That Chapter 6 would bring the moment when Coleman's retaliation struck deeper, when Evelyn's limits were tested fully, and when her hidden identity would begin to unravel in ways neither she nor the professor could control. The week leading up to the committee review passed in a blur. An agonizing blend of sleepless nights, tense mornings, and afternoons stretched thin between fear and determination. Evelyn felt like she was walking through a fog so dense she could barely see her own hands. Every sunrise carried the same mixture of dread and defiance. Every sunset felt like a small survival. Yet even in that fog, something inside her remained bright. Small, yes. Fragile, yes. But bright. On Wednesday morning, 2 days before her hearing, the sky lay heavy with clouds. Campus was restless. Students hurried past one another, anxious about midterms, internships, relationships, 1,000 tiny dramas none of them realized she no longer had the room to care about. Her world had narrowed to a single point. Friday. Friday, when the committee would decide whether she would continue at Eastbridge. Friday, when Coleman would try to break her in a way she feared she wouldn't recover from. Friday, when everything could fall apart. She crossed the quad with shaking hands tucked deep in her jacket pockets. Her footsteps slowed when she reached the business building. She felt the weight of invisible eyes, real or imagined. She couldn't tell. She inhaled deeply, exhaled shakily, and walked inside. Her first class went by without incident. Her second, she barely heard. Her third was canceled. The world continued spinning around her, relentless and indifferent. But when lunchtime came, everything shifted. She was sitting alone on a wooden bench beneath a leafless tree, eating a sandwich Laura had insisted she take that morning. Students walked by in clusters, laughing, arguing, gossiping. She tried to tune out the noise, but one conversation threaded through the din and caught her attention. 2 students, Marcus and Julia, both from Coleman's class, walked past behind her. "Heard he's furious," Marcus whispered. "Of course he is," Julia replied. "His reputation's on the line. You know Coleman, he hates losing control. Do you think he'll go after her harder?" "Probably. And everyone knows he hates when students challenge him. Especially someone like her." "Like her how?" There was a pause. "You know." Evelyn's hands went cold around her sandwich. Marcus lowered his voice even further. "Do you think she'll be kicked out?" Julia sighed. "If she hasn't cracked already." Evelyn's chest tightened. She blinked rapidly, forcing back the sting gathering behind her eyes. When they passed out of earshot, she stared down at her food, appetite gone. Someone like her. There it was again. The words that clung to her like mud she could never wash off. She closed the sandwich container and stood, her legs trembling. She needed air. She needed space. She needed something she didn't have the name for. The wind hit her face as soon as she stepped outside, sharp and biting. She walked aimlessly for a while, around the quad, down the library steps, across the back garden courtyard, until her feet carried her somewhere she hadn't intended to go. The hall outside Coleman's office. Her pulse spiked. She hadn't planned to see him. She didn't want to, but her feet rooted themselves to the spot before she could force herself to turn away. The door opened suddenly. Coleman stepped out. His eyes landed on her instantly. Miss Hart. The hallway felt too small, too quiet, too bright. She swallowed hard. "Professor." He closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. "I've been wanting to speak with you." She stiffened. "I have nothing to say." "Oh, I think you do." He stepped forward, his presence looming. "You've caused quite the stir this week." Her voice wavered. "I only tried to stand up for myself." "You tried to undermine me," he corrected. "You brought unnecessary attention to issues that should have been handled with maturity and discretion." "You humiliated me," she said, her breath catching. "In class, at the café. You've targeted me for months." "I challenged you," he said lightly. "Some students can handle pressure. Some cannot." "You weren't challenging me," she whispered. "You were breaking me." For the briefest second, his expression shifted, something like disdain flickering behind his eyes. "You don't belong in this program, Miss Hart," he said softly, cruelly. "And the committee will see that." Her heart stopped. "They'll see your inconsistencies," he continued. "Your lack of preparation, your emotional instability, and your attempts to manipulate faculty." That's a lie, she choked out. Perception, he said, is not a lie. It is simply reality in motion. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. He leaned slightly closer, voice so quiet it chilled her. When this is over, you'll wish you'd never challenged me. She stepped back, breath trembling. You can't keep doing this. He smiled faintly. Who will stop me? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Coleman straightened, adjusted his jacket, and walked away without another glance. Evelyn stood frozen, the hallway spinning around her. She didn't know how long she remained there before forcing herself to move. She walked, fast, out of the building, across campus, past the quad, past the cafeteria, past everything. She only stopped when she reached the far end of campus where an empty stone fountain sat beneath a canopy of bare branches. She sank onto the fountain edge, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she'd held back on so many nights. This time they came in harsh, painful waves. Months of fear, shame, exhaustion, and despair crashing out of her in a flood she could no longer contain. Her shoulders shook, her breath stuttered, her vision blurred. She cried until her chest hurt, until her fingers ached from gripping the stone edge, until her throat felt raw. She cried because she had tried so hard, because she had endured so much, because she had believed she was strong enough to make it on her own, and because now she wasn't sure. An hour later, when she finally calmed enough to breathe again, her phone buzzed softly. A text. Jonathan, Ev, call me when you can. Important. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater and dialed him with trembling fingers. He answered immediately. Evelyn, are you all right? The concern in his voice unraveled her all over again. No, she said quietly. I'm not. What happened? I saw him. Silence. What did he do? Jonathan asked, voice tense. She told him everything, the committee email, the confrontation in the hallway, the threats, the implications. Jonathan inhaled sharply, holding his breath for a long moment before exhaling slowly. That's it, he said. This ends now. What do you mean? You've given him the benefit of doubt long enough, Jonathan said. You've tried to fight this quietly, respectfully, but he has crossed every line. It's time to show him, and the entire institution, exactly who he's dealing with. Her heart raced. Jonathan, I'm not ready. Yes, he said firmly. You are. I've spent years hiding, she whispered. I can't just reveal myself. What if everything changes? What if people look at me differently? What if they think I only succeeded because of my name? What if? What if? Jonathan interrupted gently. The truth gives you the power you deserve. She went quiet. You are not weak, he continued, and you are not alone. But hiding has chained you to people who think they can break you. You don't need protection anymore, Evelyn. You need recognition. Her breath trembled. I don't know how to stop being afraid. You don't, he said softly. You move forward anyway. Tears welled in her eyes again, but softer this time. Not from despair, from something else. Something that felt a little like courage. What should I do? She whispered. Jonathan's voice warmed. Accept the speaking role at graduation. Evelyn froze. Jonathan, hear me out, he said. The board's decision is final. You will be introduced as the representative of Hart Industries, the largest donor the school has ever had. She closed her eyes. Let the university see you, he said. Let them hear your story. Let them understand who you are, not because of your name, but because of your strength. She pressed a hand over her heart. It was beating fast, hard, alive. And as for Coleman, Jonathan paused. Your existence, your success, your truth will be the reckoning he's been running from. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Evelyn whispered, I'll think about it. I know you will, Jonathan said softly. And whatever you choose, I will stand behind you. When the call ended, Evelyn sat alone by the fountain, watching the sky darken. Snow began to fall, barely visible flakes drifting lazily through the cold air. settling softly on the stone around her. For the first time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. Felt clarifying. She stayed there until the faint glow of streetlights flickered on. Then she rose slowly, brushed the snow from her coat, and walked back toward campus. The committee meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Friday. She wasn't ready, but she was done being afraid. Friday morning dawned cold and gray. Evelyn dressed carefully, choosing a clean white blouse and charcoal blazer. Simple, neat, professional. Her hands shook as she buttoned the cuffs. She walked to the administrative building with steady, deliberate steps. The hall outside the meeting room was quiet. A row of chairs lined the wall. The clock above them ticked too loudly. Dean Marlborough appeared moments later. When he saw her, he offered a reassuring smile. "Are you ready?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm here." "That's enough," he said warmly. At 9:01, the committee doors opened. Evelyn stepped inside. 3 faculty members sat behind a long table. Coleman sat at the far end, face smooth, unreadable. She refused to look at him. The committee chair cleared her throat. "Miss Hart, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the materials submitted. We'd like to hear your perspective." Evelyn took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. "My perspective," she began quietly, "is that I tried to do everything right." Her voice shook, but she continued. "I work part-time to support myself. I study hard. I submit my work on time. I try to participate, but I have been singled out, diminished, humiliated, punished for circumstances I didn't choose." She swallowed hard. "And I believe Professor Coleman has graded me unfairly." Coleman shifted, lips thinning. "And I believe," Evelyn's voice softened, but didn't falter, "that he wants me gone." Silence thickened the room. Dean Marlborough nodded, his presence beside her like a shield. The committee asked questions about her work, her grades, her experiences. She answered honestly, calmly, truthfully. She did not exaggerate. She did not accuse. She simply told the truth. When the meeting ended, they asked her to step outside while they deliberated. She waited. Minutes crawled by. Her heart pounded. Finally, the door opened. "Miss Hart," the chair said gently. "You may come in." She braced herself. "We have reviewed all materials," the chair said, "and we find no evidence of academic dishonesty, misconduct, or performance issues warranting disciplinary action." Evelyn's breath hitched. "In fact," the chair continued, "we find your work strong, consistent, and reflective of high academic aptitude." Her vision blurred with sudden tears. "Therefore," the chair concluded, "the review is dismissed, and a secondary inquiry into grading fairness is being opened." Coleman stiffened. His mask cracked, for one dangerous second, revealing something dark, cold, furious beneath. But for the first time, Evelyn didn't feel small. She felt steady. When she stepped out of the room, Dean Marlborough touched her shoulder gently. "Well done," she exhaled shakily. "Thank you. You fought bravely," he said, "and you won't be fighting alone from now on." For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest. She left the building, stepping into the pale morning sunlight. Snow still drifted gently from the sky, sparkling as it fell, soft, quiet, beautiful. She walked across campus with her head held higher than it had been in months. Students passed her, unaware of the battle she had fought alone. But Evelyn knew, and that was enough. That night, she sat on her futon, wrapped in a blanket, her notebook resting open on her lap. The room felt different. Not larger, not brighter, but freer. As if something heavy had lifted. She picked up her pen, and slowly, carefully, wrote, "On graduation day, I will stand in the light." Her hand trembled, then steadied. "I will show them who I am, not because of my name, but because I survived." A tear slipped down her cheek, not of fear, but of release. The snow fell softly outside, and Evelyn Hart, the girl who had spent years hiding, finally felt herself becoming whole again. She closed her notebook, placed it by her pillow, and whispered into the quiet, "It's time." It was not a declaration of war. It was a declaration of self, and the beginning of a new life, a life she would walk into with her head high, without shame, without fear, and without apologizing for the strength she had earned. The next chapter of her story would not be about pain. It would be about becoming, and she was finally ready.